She had walked through wars. She had watched entire dynasties collapse like towers made of ash, and she had not blinked. She had stood at the edge of an ocean that no longer existed and watched the water drain into a crack in the earth the width of a sigh. And she had felt nothing but the particular calm of someone who has already grieved everything once and has no grief left to spare. She had been cursed by 3 gods and outlasted all 3. She had been loved by men who later tried to kill her, and she had found that easier to understand than almost anything. None of it, not one single century of it, had ever made her afraid, until a girl knocked on her door. She was 19 years old and she came in the dark, before the first light, carrying nothing but a leather satchel worn thin at the strap and the cloak that had belonged to her dead mother. The gods should have stopped her. The law was iron. No uninvited mortal crosses the threshold without consequence. In 200 years, 12 people had tried. Not one of them left the same way they arrived. She knocked. She stood at the gate in the pale grey dark and knocked like she was visiting a neighbor. No trembling, no pleading, just waiting. And I looked down from the high window and I felt something I had not felt in so long. I spent 3 full seconds not knowing what it was. Then I remembered. This is the story of the first time I was afraid. Not of dying, not of the gods. Of something so much harder to survive than either of those things. This is the story of Lyra. If this story pulled you in, like the video and follow Medusa's Memories. Tell us, what state are you listening from? The law of my house is not cruelty. People like to say it is. The former priests, who rebuilt their temples and cities I no longer patrol. The merchants, who rerouted their caravans 300 miles south, just to avoid crossing my borders. The mothers of men who came to petition me and received back only their sons' sandals. They call it cruelty. They are wrong. The law exists because I learned the cost of exceptions. The last man who arrived uninvited was a senator's son named Callum, wide shoulders, easy smile, carrying a letter from a family I had once, briefly, considered something close to allies. The letter said he came in peace. He only wanted to negotiate a trade agreement. He had a gift the gods knew. They believed the letter. They opened the outer gate without sending word to me first. He carried something hidden in the false base of his water flask. Not water. A compound made from selenium salts and powdered limestone, which, when introduced to living stone, even the kind of living stone that exists in the bones of creatures like me, accelerates calcification, speeds the turning. It was not enough to do permanent damage, but it was enough to slow me down for 10 minutes. And 10 minutes was all anyone ever needed to make a run for the inner chamber where the relics are kept. He was escorted out, alive. I was not angry. Anger is a response for people who are surprised by things. I was not surprised. I had been careless with protocol, and careless has a cost. I dismissed both gods, not in fury, just in fact, and I rewrote the law on the wall beside the outer gate in letters a finger-width deep. No mortal enters without invitation. No exception, no appeal. No letter from anyone, living or dead, changes this. 200 years passed. No one knocked. Until the morning the girl did. Her name was Lyra, and I knew her face before she lifted it toward the window. I had not seen her in 11 years, but some faces do not leave you. She was the child who used to fall asleep in the south corridor while her mother worked. Small, dark-haired, deeply stubborn even in sleep. Curled against the base of a pillar like she had decided the stone was hers, and that was simply that. I had stepped over her twice. The third time I sat down on the floor beside her, not out of sentiment, but because I was tired and the pillar was as good a place as any to think. Her mother, Myra had served me for 40 years. Not as a slave, I want to be precise about this. Because there is a version of this story that makes Myra a victim, and I will not tell that version. Myra came to me when she was 22, after the city she was born in was taken by an army with no particular ideology, just an appetite for land and silver. She came with her older sister and 2 cousins and a cart full of preserved fish, and she asked me, through the gate, whether I had any use for a woman who could read contracts in 4 languages and cook 3 kinds of fish soup. I said yes. Her sister and cousins found work in the lower town. Myra stayed. She stayed for 40 years. She learned my moods the way sailors learn weather, not by asking, but by observation, by accumulating data until the pattern was clear. She learned that I preferred silence in the morning and would accept conversation after the 2nd hour of light. She learned that certain questions angered me and others did not, and she never confused the two. She learned that I do not like to be thanked, because gratitude implies debt, and I do not trade in debt. She learned all of this, and she never tried to be more than what she was. Someone who did her work well and asked for nothing beyond fair compensation and, in years of service, a certain quality of mutual respect. 3 weeks before her daughter appeared at my gate, Myra died of a fever. It came fast. The way death comes for the ones who least expect it, not because they're careless, but because they've spent a lifetime being careful, and the body eventually runs out of arguments to give the disease. She was fine on a Tuesday. She was burning by Thursday. By Sunday she was gone. I paid for the funeral rites. I sent the formal letter of recognition that allows her family to claim double the standard pension. I did not attend the ceremony. I do not attend ceremonies for the dead. It is not coldness. It is the particular exhaustion of someone who has attended to many, across to many centuries, to continue treating each one as an event, rather than simply another return of a thing that was always going to happen. I thought about Myra for several days after. Not grief, exactly. More like the specific quiet that settles in a room when a familiar sound stops, the absence that takes time to name. And then it was 3 weeks later and her daughter was at my gate in the dark, knocking like she lived there. I went to the window. Ta-dome. I saw the cloak first. Myra's cloak. The heavy wool one dyed the particular blue-green of deep harbor water that she wore in cold mornings. When she was walking between the main house and the storerooms, I had seen that cloak for 40 years. It is a strange thing to see a dead woman's clothing walking around without her. Lyra had her mother's dark hair, but the rest of her was her own, a quality of stillness that had nothing to do with calm. More like the stillness of something that has decided not to waste movement on things that don't matter. She stood at the gate and waited. She didn't look up at the window. She seemed to know she was being watched and seemed entirely unbothered by it. The gate guard Petra, 30 years of service, not the kind of person who makes impulsive decisions, looked up at me with the specific expression of someone who wants direction and is not going to be able to hold still much longer. I told her to let the girl in. It took me for seconds to say it. In those for seconds, I felt something I could not immediately identify, a kind of tightening in the chest, a hyper-awareness of my own hands and whether they were steady. The specific quality of anticipation that I had not experienced since I had to reach far back to find the comparison. Since the morning, 300 years ago, when I stood at the edge of a battle I knew I would win and felt, for the first time, the unwanted awareness that winning was not the same as wanting to have fought at all. The servants, who were already at work in the first corridor, watched her. Everyone was watching. This was a person walking where no uninvited person had walked in 200 years, and the air itself seemed to notice. I met her in the receiving chamber. She was taller than I remembered. Thinner, which made sense. She had been in mourning for 3 weeks, and grief takes appetite first. She carried the leather satchel against her hip, and her mother's cloak was fastened at the throat with a pin. I did not recognize something plain in bronze without markings. When she saw me, she stopped walking but did not step back. She did not drop her eyes. She looked at me the way her mother had always looked at me, the look of someone who has considered the situation carefully and arrived at a position and is not planning to revise it under social pressure. "I came to thank you," she said. Her voice was lower than I expected, steadier. "The funeral rites," she continued. "The pension. You didn't have to do either. My mother said you wouldn't. She said you didn't do things like that." A pause. She was proud of being wrong. I did not say anything. I was watching her hands. Her left hand was loose at her side. Her right hand held the strap of the satchel, not tightly, but with the particular grip of someone who is aware of what they are carrying. "I also brought something," she said. She asked me to deliver it before she died. It was the last coherent thing she said. "Bring this to her. Tell her it's from me. Tell her I said thank you for letting me be stubborn all those years." She reached into the satchel and took out a vial. Small, blue glass, the kind used for perfumes or tinctures, sealed at the top with dark wax. She said it was a scent she had made, something she'd been working on. Lyra held it out. "She wanted you to have it." I looked at the vial. Myra had been many things: precise, loyal, difficult in the most useful possible way, but she had never, in 40 years, made perfume. She was not a person who worked with scents. She found the whole enterprise inefficient. She had said as much to me once, with the particular bluntness that was her version of affection. "Why would you spend 3 hours extracting the essence of something when you could simply stand near the thing itself?" I looked at the vial. "I did not take it." "Leave it on the table," I said. "I'll look at it later." Lyra put it down. She adjusted the satchel strap. She looked at me for a moment longer than was strictly comfortable, the way her mother used to look at me, when she thought I was making a mistake but had decided not to say so out loud. Then she sighed. "She talked about you a lot in the last weeks. I think she thought about you a great deal." I said, "Your mother was one of the finest people who worked in this house. She will be remembered here." Lenadat. She was not satisfied with this. I could see it. The small tightening around her eyes that meant the response was technically adequate, but emotionally incomplete. But she accepted it. She picked up the satchel. "I'll go," she said. "Stay for the morning meal," I said. I did not plan to say it. It came out, and then it was said, and I did not take it back, because I have learned, in a very long life, that taking things back rarely improves the situation and usually makes it worse. I said it, and it was out, and the girl looked at me with an expression I couldn't classify. Something between surprise and the specific quiet of something that had hoped for something and was not letting itself believe it yet. "All right," she said. She sat at the table in the east room where the light comes first. She ate without ceremony, without performing gratitude, without talking too much. At one point, she watched me read a letter that had arrived from the Northern Territories, and she said nothing about it. Simply waited the way her mother had always waited, with the patience of someone who understood that silence was not empty. After the meal, I watched her walk toward the outer gate, and I noticed, for the first time, that the hem of her mother's cloak was slightly heavier on one side than the other. Not much. The kind of thing that only registers when you are looking for asymmetry. When something in you is already alert to the possibility that not everything is what it appears to be. I told Petra to stop her at the outer gate, gently, on a pretext, a question about the estate records. Something requiring her signature, anything. Then I went back to the east room and I picked up the cloak she had left folded on the chair. I ran my hand along the hem. There was something there. Inside the lining. Flat unstiff, not the heaviness of extra fabric, but the specific resistance of paper that has been sealed. I felt the cold move through me like a current through deep water. The cold that is not temperature, the cold that is recognition. I sat down with the cloak in my lap and I thought, Myra, what did you do? The vial was still on the table. Blue glass, dark wax seal, sitting perfectly still in the morning light. I thought about what I already knew, who had been circling my borders in the past year, asking questions in the lower towns, recruiting from the families of former servants. I thought about a name I had heard twice in the past 6 months from my network of informants. Always in the same context, always attached to the same specific interest. The mechanics of mortal inoculation into living stone, the Hollow Covenant. Aliança do Vazio. A group of former high priests who believed, with the fervent specificity of the deeply wronged, that the gift of immortality had been stolen from the old pantheon and placed in a vessel, me, that had no right to it. I thought about Myra. I remembered dying of fever, that particular flavor in her last days. Not fear of danger. I thought about the last fear of something coherent thing she told her daughter. Bring this to her. I let the girl in. Tell her it's from me. She walked through the outer gate, and very then through the inner gate, cloak and then through the stone corridor that the light, for the second hasn't time reached properly since the thing I had almost forgotten the name of. And she moved through all of it. The hem had a seam that did not match the rest of the stitching. The guards watched her. Newer, smaller stitches, the kind made by hands that were not practiced, or by hands that were shaking. I needed to open it. But I did not want to open it there. Not yet. Not alone with only the morning light, and the sound of the girl's footsteps, fading at the gate. I needed to know what was in it before I knew what to do with Lyra, and I needed to know what to do with Lyra before she was too far to stop. I sent the fastest runner in the house after her with a message. There was a document that needed a witness. A formality. It would take only minutes. Please come back. She came back. She sat in the outer hall and waited while I went to the study and opened the cloak's hem with a blade and took out what was inside. It was not what I expected. I had expected, in the clean corner of my mind that makes logical predictions, something crude, a rough map, a hastily written set of instructions, the kind of documentation that desperate people produce when they are out of time. The Hollow Covenant had never struck me as sophisticated. They were believers, not strategists. Believers are dangerous in their own way, but the danger is blunt. They rarely have the patience for complexity. What I unfolded in my study was not blunt. It was 3 pages, dense, written in a hand I recognized instantly and felt, somewhere below my ribs, like a key turning in a lock I had forgotten existed. Myra's handwriting. But not Myra as I knew her, the efficient, precise script of someone who wrote for information transfer and nothing else. This was Myra writing under pressure, under something. Writing the way people write, when they are terrified of forgetting something before they are able to say it. The first page was a letter to Lyra. I will not reproduce it in full because there are parts of it that belong to Lyra alone. But the relevant section read, "My love, I am writing this before the fever takes the rest of what is left of me to think. I made a mistake. I made it 2 years ago and I have been trying to repair it for 2 years, and I have not been able to. I need you to fix it, not because you should have to bear this, but because I cannot bear that it ends with me having made it worse. The vial in the satchel is not perfume. I need you to know that before you deliver it, so that you choose to deliver it or not to deliver it with full knowledge. I was not brave enough to make this choice. You are braver than me. You always were. The second page was documentation. Specific, technical, devastating in its completeness. 2 years ago, Myra had been approached by a man named Thesan, former high priest of the Meridian Order, a sect that predated my rule by 2 centuries, which had been dissolved, not violently, simply made irrelevant by the new architecture of power when I consolidated the territories. Thesan had come to Myra not as an enemy, but as a historian. He wanted her help verifying records from the early period of my tenure, administrative documents, census data, correspondence. He said he was writing a history of the region. He said it would take a few months. He said he valued accuracy above all things, and Myra, who also valued accuracy above almost all things, had agreed. She agreed, and over the course of 8 months, she helped him build a picture of my first 2 decades of rule, administrative patterns, movement habits, seasonal routines. She told herself it was history. She told herself, Myra, who read contracts in 4 languages and could spot a false provenance from across a room, that it was simply historical documentation. She knew better. She admitted it in the letter. The specific sentence was, I knew I was giving him information I shouldn't have. I told myself the harm was small and that he would not know what to do with it. I was wrong about the second part. I don't know about the first. What Thesan had done with the information, he had used the administrative patterns. Myra documented to identify the seasonal vulnerability in my household, the 2-week period each spring when my retinue is smallest, when key security staff rotate for training, when the palace operates at 60% capacity. He had used the movement habits to determine how I interact with voluntary offerings, specifically that I tend to receive them directly from trusted intermediaries, rather than having them inspected first. Because the inspection protocol had been designed for weapons, not gifts. The vial was not perfume. It was a compound of pressed mineral extracts from the deep limestone caves in the Western Territories, the same limestone. I understood immediately, as the compound Callum had carried in his flask. But refined, concentrated, made soluble and therefore transferable through skin contact. Voluntary contact. Not forced. Forced contact with this compound would trigger my body's defensive response immediately. But if I touched it of my own will, if I received it as a gift, if I held it for long enough with the warmth of my own intent, the compound would begin its work, not calcification, something subtler. A temporary disruption of the coordination between will and movement. Paralysis was the wrong word. It was more like the severing of the thread between decision and execution. I could think. I could want, but my body would not respond to me. For approximately 90 minutes. 90 minutes was the length of the ritual Thesan had designed. The 3rd page was the ritual itself. I read it twice. It was not particularly complex. It required access to the inner chamber, the presence of 3 practitioners, a specific sequence of spoken words in the old tongue, and approximately 60 minutes of uninterrupted proximity to the source of the power, which was me. Or rather, the specific point at the base of my sternum, where the gift of immortality had been anchored so long ago that I sometimes forgot it was a distinct thing and not simply part of what I was. Thesan had thought of everything, except one thing. He had not thought, or had thought and dismissed it, which is a worse kind of not thinking, that Myra might tell the truth. I read the letter a 3rd time. I sat very still. Through the study window, I could see the outer courtyard. And in the outer courtyard I could see Lyra, sitting on the bench near the gate, waiting with that stillness she had inherited from her mother, looking at nothing in particular. Patient in the way of people who have learned to wait without spending themselves on the waiting. She didn't know. That was the first thing I was certain of after reading the letter. Every instinct I had, and I have very old instincts, trained across centuries of distinguishing genuine innocence from performed innocence, said Lyra did not know. She had received the satchel with the vial and the instruction to deliver it, and she had come, not out of obedience, to a plan she was part of, but out of love for her mother and the specific stubbornness of someone who always finishes what she starts. She had not even opened the vial. She had no curiosity about it. She had carried it here because her mother asked her to, and she had stood at my gate in the dark because it seemed like the kind of thing that should be done before sunrise. While the world was still quiet, she didn't know. And Myra, in her fever, in the last coherent hours, had written the letter precisely to fix that, to give Lyra the full truth, so that Lyra could choose. Because Myra could not deliver the gift herself, and the ritual had a deadline, the spring rotation window was closing in 5 days, and Thesan would be looking for his outcome. If Lyra didn't deliver the vial, Thesan would come for it. Or come for another approach entirely. I put the letter down. I thought about the 12 people who had arrived uninvited over the pass. To centuries. The one I was sorest about was a young woman in the 14th year of my rule who arrived at the outer gate claiming to have a message from someone I had cared for. Someone whose name she should not have been able to know. She knew the name because she had been given it specifically to use as a key. She was 19 years old and she had no idea she was being used. I did not know that at the time. I learned it 3 years later. By then it was too late for it to matter. I did not want to make that mistake again. But I also could not simply let Lyra go. Because the moment she walked out of my gates, without delivering the vial, the Covenant would know something had gone wrong. And the Covenant's contingency, I did not yet know what it was. But groups like the Hollow Covenant always had one, would be activated. The spring rotation was in 5 days. Thesan had been preparing this for 2 years. He was not going to wait quietly for a different opportunity. I called for Petra. When she came, I told her, keep the girl here. Don't explain. Find a reason. If she becomes distressed, bring her to me. If she tries to leave, bring her to me. Do not let her leave. Petra looked at me with the expression of someone who has been asked to do something uncomfortable but not unjust, and she said, yes. Then I called for Doran, who handles my security intelligence, and I said, I need everything you have on Thesan. Former High Priest, Meridian Order. Where he has been in the past 2 years. Who he has spoken to. Where he is now. Doran said, I have some, not everything. I'll need 2 hours. I said, you have 1. And then I went to find Lyra. She was still on the bench in the courtyard. She looked up when she saw me coming, and she did not perform surprise or alarm at being held here longer than expected. She simply waited for me to tell her what I needed. I sat down on the bench beside her. I did not say anything at first. I sat there with the morning advancing around us, the light moving across the stone floor of the courtyard, the sounds of the house starting its day, and I tried to find the language for what I needed to ask her. I asked her, did your mother say anything to you before she died? Anything about the vial? She was quiet for a moment. Not a long moment. The kind of quiet that means someone is deciding how honest to be. She said it wasn't perfume, Lyra said. She said she wanted me to know that before I delivered it. I said, and you came anyway. I came anyway. she said. I looked at her. She looked at me. The morning light was very clear and I could see, in her face, the specific quality of someone who has made a decision they are not entirely at peace with, but who has decided to be at peace with having made it. A decision that cost something. A decision made in full knowledge of the cost. Why? I said. Because she asked me to, Lyra said. And because I decided you could handle whatever it was better than I could, and that it wasn't my job to decide for you. I thought about this. It was, in its own way, a profound answer. It had the logic of someone who trusts other people to be capable, not blind trust. Not naive trust, but trust as a form of respect. She had known something was complicated about the vial, and she had decided I was the right person to deal with complicated things. Because she had spent 19 years watching her mother operate in my orbit, and she had drawn her own conclusions about what I was capable of, she was not wrong. She was also in a great deal of danger, and she didn't fully know it yet. Your mother made a mistake 2 years ago, I said. Someone used that mistake to build something that is aimed at me. The vial is part of it. It's not poison, but it's not safe. And the people who built this plan are not going to wait patiently, because the delivery didn't happen the way they intended. Lyra said nothing. She was listening with the quality of attention that is so complete it changes the texture of the air. I don't know yet exactly where Thesan is, I said. I'm finding out. But I know the window he is working with, and it closes in 5 days, and I know that he will move before it closes. What do you need me to do? She sighed. I looked at her hands, steady. The hands of someone who has already accepted the situation and is now only interested in what comes next. I don't know yet, I said, but I need you to stay here until I do. All right, she said. No argument, no demand for reassurance, no performance of bravery or fear. Simply, all right. And who had left her 19-year-old daughter carrying the weight of something she hadn't asked for and couldn't fully understand. And who had told that daughter the truth in the last hours because she could not bear for the weight to be carried in ignorance. I thought about what it had cost Myra to write that letter, to admit, in the specific clarity of dying, that she had done something she should not have, to trust her daughter with the repair, to let go without knowing how it would end. I thought, you were better than you knew, Myra, and I am sorry I did not tell you so when I had the chance. I did not say this out loud. I said, Doran will come for me shortly. Don't leave this courtyard. I'll come back to you when I know more. She nodded. I stood up, she said, very quietly, to the air. My mother really did love working here. I want you to know that. Whatever she did, she loved it. I walked back inside. I did not turn around, but I heard it. Doran came with his report, 47 minutes later. Thesan had arrived in the lower town 3 days ago. He was staying in a property registered to a member of the Covenant's administrative circle. He had 6 people with him, which was more than the ritual required. The 3 additional were almost certainly security. People whose job was to manage the perimeter while the ritual happened. They were not staying quietly. They had been making inquiries, buying supplies, charting the routes from the lower town to the palace. They were not waiting for an opportune moment. They were building toward one. When? I asked. 3 days, Doran said. Maybe 2. One of my contacts in the lower town says there's been a delivery of limestone-based compounds to the property. Not a large one. Just enough. Just enough for the ritual. Just enough if everything had gone according to the plan. For Lyra to have delivered the vial and for me to have accepted it, and for the compound to have done its work, before I understood what was happening. The plan had almost been elegant. 2 days. I had 2 days to decide what to do with a girl who had walked into the middle of someone else's design, and was now the only leverage point I had against the people who built it. I have made many decisions in a very long life, and the ones that have cost me most were never the ones I made in anger. Anger is clean. Anger moves through a decision like weather. It comes, it changes the atmosphere, it passes, and what it leaves behind is at least traceable, visible, understandable. The decisions that cost most were always the cold ones. The ones I made in full clarity, in complete awareness of all the information available. With no emotion to blur the calculus, those were the decisions that stayed with me. Those were the ones I went back to in the quiet hours, turning them over, finding the same answer I always found, which was, given what I knew, I would do the same thing again, and that was the part that refused to stop hurting. I spent 12 hours considering my options. The first option: send Lyra away. Give her safe passage out of the territories through a route Thesan wouldn't expect. Remove her from the equation entirely. Deny the Covenant their vector. The consequence: Thesan would know the delivery had failed. He would move to his contingency, and while I did not know the contingency specifically, I knew the man was not operating on a single point of failure. He had spent 2 years building this. He would have a second approach. The spring rotation window was still 2 days open. If I sent Lyra away and closed this path, he would find another one, and I would face it without knowing what it was. The second option: use Lyra, not as a weapon. She was not a weapon. She was a person, and I want to be precise about the distinction, but as a channel. Allow her to deliver the vial. Have her give Thesan the impression the plan was proceeding. Use the delivery as the mechanism to expose the Covenant's location and timing. Move before they could complete the ritual. The consequence: Lyra, in direct proximity to people who would not value her existence once her usefulness was confirmed. People who, if they realized the plan had been compromised, would treat the nearest available person as a liability to be removed. The third option was one I did not consider for very long, because it was the kind of option that, once considered, has to be actively discarded or it calcifies into something you didn't intend. The third option was to handle the compound and the Covenant entirely on my own terms, without involving Lyra at all, without using anyone. Go to them directly, in full power before they could complete their preparations. I discarded this because it was the option that protected me perfectly while solving nothing about the Covenant long term. Thesan would be stopped. The ritual would not happen. But the Covenant would scatter, and they would rebuild. And in 5 years, or 10 years, there would be another. Myra, another honest person with a single careless moment, and another carefully constructed approach. And I would be back here again. I needed to know who all 11 were. The letter had mentioned 11 others who held the ritual knowledge. Thesan was the architect, but destroying the architect leaves the structure. I needed to draw them out. I called for Lyra. She came quickly, which told me she had been waiting. She sat down across from me in the study and folded her hands in her lap and said, "You've decided something." "I have," I said. "I need you to understand the full picture before I ask you anything." I told her everything: the letter, the compound, the ritual, Thesan's 2-year preparation, the spring rotation window, the 11 names I didn't have. I laid it out in its complete form, the way you lay out a map, not to frighten, but to ensure that whoever you are navigating with can see the same terrain you see. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You want me to deliver the vial. I want you to consider it," I said, "as a choice, not as a tool. As a choice that you make with full understanding of what it entails." She looked at me. "What does it entail?" "It means going back to wherever they are expecting you to come from. It means having contact with people who will see you as a means to an end. It means I need to be close enough to intervene if something goes wrong, which means they will eventually realize I was watching." And in that moment, I paused. "In that moment, the period of greatest risk is yours, not mine. But you'd get their names. I would get their location, their timing. Enough to identify all of them," she said. "What happens to them after?" "The covenant is disbanded," I said. "The ones who have direct involvement in the ritual face the legal consequence of conspiracy against a ruling authority. The ones on the periphery, those who knew and didn't participate, I'll determine case by case. And Thiessen made this plan," I said. "He stays in my custody until I am satisfied that I have everything I need to ensure this doesn't rebuild." She thought about this. I watched her think about it. Not performance, not deliberation for my benefit, actual thought. The kind that happens behind the eyes, that changes the expression in small increments as the implications arrive and are processed and accepted or rejected. Then she sighed. "There's something I haven't told you. I waited my mother in the letter. She told me what was in the vial. I knew before I came here what it was." She looked at her hands. I knew it wasn't perfume. I knew what it was designed to do. "And I came anyway, because I thought," a pause, "I thought if I could deliver it and you received it, and if it worked, then at least my mother's mistake would have done something. At least it would have completed what they wanted it to complete. And then you could deal with them from a position of, I don't know, I thought it might be easier to neutralize you, and then let you recover, and then handle them." I sat very still. "You were going to let me be neutralized," I said. "I was going to give you the choice," she said. "I was going to tell you everything and let you decide, which is what I'm doing. I'm telling you later than I should have." I thought about this for a very long time. She had come here with the full knowledge of what she was carrying. She had not come in ignorance. She had come in the specific bravery of someone who has made their peace with the complexity of what they are doing and has decided to bring it directly to the source and let the source decide. She had not tried to protect me from the information. She had not tried to make the decision for me. She had carried something heavy all the way to my door and set it down on the table and said, "Here, it's yours to decide what to do with." It was the single most honest thing anyone had done for me in longer than I wanted to calculate. I said, "Don't deliver the vial." She looked up. "I have a different plan," I said. The plan was simple. Thiessen was coming regardless of whether the vial was delivered. His timeline was closing, and he was not the kind of person who stopped when the first approach failed. He would come to the palace in 2 days. He would come with his 6 people, 3 for the ritual and 3 for the perimeter. He knew the spring rotation schedule because Myra had helped him build it. He knew the layout of the palace because of the records she had helped him access. He would come through the eastern approach, where the wall was lowest and the guard presence lightest during the rotation period. What he did not know, I knew all of this. And I had 48 hours to adjust every single element of his advantage. I moved the rotation, brought back the full retinue, reinforced the eastern wall, repositioned the guards so that the eastern approach had 3 times its normal presence, all of it hidden, none of it visible from outside. And I put Lyra in the southern guest room, which had the best stone walls in the palace. And I told her, stay here. Don't open the door unless it's me or Petra, she said. You're not going to use me as bait. No, I said. She looked at me with the expression of someone checking the honesty of a statement against their instincts. Then she seemed to decide. All right. Thesan came on the second morning. Not at night, which surprised me. He came at full dawn, which told me he was more confident than careful. He came with exactly 6 people, 3 of whom split off immediately at the outer wall to handle the perimeter, and 3 of whom moved directly toward the interior. He himself was in the central group. I had seen him once before, years ago, at a public ceremony. He had been younger then, and he had had the particular expression of someone who believes the recognition they deserve is being withheld. A kind of burning patience that, if you didn't know better, could be mistaken for dignity. He still had it. 20 years had not changed it. The 3 perimeter people were managed by my guards before they reached the wall. The 3 who came inside, Thesan and 2 of the ritual practitioners, got as far as the second inner courtyard. That was as far as I allowed them to get. I met them there. I want to be clear about what happened in the second inner courtyard. There was no prolonged combat. I am not interested in prolonged combat. It is inefficient, and it sends the wrong message. The 2 practitioners were disarmed and restrained before they had finished assessing the situation. Thesan himself was faster than I expected. He had something in his left hand. A small ceramic disc, the kind used in certain older rituals as a focal point, but Petra, who had been positioned directly behind him, had him contained before he could activate it. He looked at me with that burning patience and he said, "You got the letter. Myra wrote you into it," I said. He said, "She wasn't supposed to." "No," I said. "I imagine not." There was a moment then, one of those moments that happens in confrontations, where everything that was in motion comes to a pause, where both sides hold their positions and assess what they actually have. He looked at me and I looked at him, and the 2 practitioners were being held against the courtyard wall by Petra's team, and the morning was very clear and quiet. He said, "You know there are others." 11, I said. "I know." "And you think capturing me gives you the names?" "I think capturing you starts a conversation," I said. "How long that conversation takes depends on you." He smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of someone who believes they still have a card to play. He said, "The girl." I felt something go cold in my chest that had nothing to do with temperature. He said, "She's in the south guest room. We identified her when she arrived. She came through the lower town 2 days ago, and one of ours saw her. If I don't send a signal in the next," he looked at the light, calculating, 20 minutes. "Someone goes to the south guest room," I said. "There is no one left to send. Your perimeter people were taken before they reached the wall." He looked at me. He was assessing whether I was telling the truth. He was good at that. I could see it. The specific quality of attention of someone trained to read deception. But there was one thing he hadn't counted on. The south guest room had a window that overlooked the second inner courtyard. Lyra had been watching. I had told her to stay in her room and not open the door, and she had obeyed the letter of that instruction perfectly, and the spirit of it not at all. She had been at the window, watching, and she had seen Thesan's hand go to his left pocket, where he kept the ceramic disc. And she had seen Petra take him, and she had seen his expression when he made his calculation about the signal. And she had understood, with the same kind of fast, clean logic her mother had, exactly what was happening. She had the vial. She had brought it with her from the guest room, tucked into her shirt, I had told her not to deliver it. I had not told her to discard it. She opened the window. She was close enough to the courtyard. The south wing was only 2 floors up, that she could hear clearly. She heard Theson's calculation. She heard me say his perimeter was gone. She heard the pause that followed, the specific silence of a man whose plan has fractured, but who is looking for the seam. She dropped the vial. It fell from 2 floors up and shattered on the stone directly beside Theson's feet. The compound in it, the limestone extract, the paralytic mineral compound, the thing designed to work through voluntary contact with living intent, spread across the stone. And Theson, in the reflex of someone who didn't know exactly what it was, stepped directly into a undone. He looked up at the window where Lyra had appeared. He looked at me. Then the compound did what it was designed to do, and Theson could no longer move. The 2 practitioners were already restrained. The perimeter team was already in custody. The ritual would not happen. It was over in 11 seconds. I looked up at the window. Lyra was looking down at me with an expression I recognized, the specific look of someone who has done something they cannot take back and has not yet decided how they feel about it. There was something dark on her hands. She had held the vial to drop it. She had the compound on her palms. The same compound that had just paralyzed Theson. In Theson, it was working through the solace of his feet. Unintentional contact, the reflex step into a spreading liquid. In Lyra, it was working through her hands, which had held the vial, which had been in warm contact with the glass for long enough that the compound had begun to transfer. I was moving before I had finished understanding it. Up the stairs through the corridor, to the south guest room door, which I had told her not to open from the inside, but which I could open from the outside. She was sitting on the floor when I got there, her back against the wall below the window, her hands in her lap, turned up with the skin reddening where the compound had touched. She looked at me. She opened her mouth to say something. Nothing came out. The compound, in small amounts through voluntary skin contact, did not cause full paralysis. It was not designed to work that way at this concentration, absorbed through the hands rather than the sternum. But it had reached what it could reach in the time it had, and what it had reached, in Lyra, was the fine motor control of the throat, the specific muscles that coordinate speech. She was fully conscious, fully present. Her hands moved. Her eyes moved. Everything moved except the instrument. She needed to say what she needed to say. She looked at me. I sat down on the floor beside her, the way I had sat beside her when she was 7 years old and asleep in the corridor. The way I had not thought about until this exact moment, when the symmetry of it arrived and I understood. With the specific slowness of recognition that has been waiting for you to catch up, what it meant, I said, "I've got you." I said it knowing she could hear me, knowing it was not enough, knowing it was the only thing I had. Outside, Petra's team was securing Theson and the practitioners. Theson was already being asked questions. His voice worked fine. He was not happy about it. The conversation was going to take a while, and it was going to give me everything I needed about the 11 others. None of that felt very important in that moment. What felt important was the girl on the floor, with her hands in her lap, who had dropped the vial because she had understood the situation faster than I could intervene, who had acted on her own judgment with the same clean efficiency her mother had always had, and who was now paying the cost of that judgment in the most immediate possible way. I reached out and took her hands. The compound was still active on her palms. I felt it, the slight resistance, the disruption. My nervous system registered it and immediately identified it as not a threat to me. Which is the particular advantage of spending centuries, learning every compound that has ever been pointed in my direction. I held her hands. She looked at me. There was no fear in it. Self-pity. There was the particular quality of someone who has done something that cost them something and has decided, quietly, that the cost was correct. I thought, you are your mother's daughter in every way that matters. I thought, I am so sorry this happened. I did not say either of these things out loud. I sat on the floor and held her hands and waited for the morning to finish. The compound wore off over the course of 11 days. Not a wall at once with from stone. Ingredients, unevenly, leaving some things restored before others. Her hands recovered first. Then the ability to swallow. Then the fine control that governs expression, so that her face 40 years returned to her before her voice did. Who had made one mistake I had 11 days of watching her be fully present, or the specific vulnerability of smart people who think they can manage more than they can. She stayed and who had spent 2 years trying to repair it. I didn't ask her to stay. And who had died of a fever before she simply didn't leave. Every morning Petra brought her breakfast, and I came to the room at midday, and we sat together in the particular silence that exists between people who have a great deal to say and no mechanism for saying it yet. She wrote. Not on paper, at first. She wrote with her finger on the dusty sill of the window, the fine layer of dust from the spring courtyard that drifted in through the glass, tracing letters in it, and then erasing them and tracing others. Short things, logistical. The first word she wrote was water, pointing at the cup on the table. The second thing she wrote was, "Is Thiessen talking?" I said, "Yes." She erased it. She traced, "Names." I said, "He's given me 9 so far. He's resistant about the last 2. He'll give them in time." She considered this and wrote, "Good." Then she looked at me for a long moment and wrote, slowly, with more care than the others, "Did you know I would drop it?" "No," I said. "I didn't." She thought about this. She wrote, "Would you have used me?" I sat with that question for what it deserved. "I considered it," I said. "As one option of several, I decided against it." She looked at me. The expression on her face was not accusation. It was the look of someone measuring the weight of honesty, deciding whether the scale registers as fair. She wrote, "Why?" "Because the risk to you was unacceptable," I said. "And because the option required treating you as a tool, and you are not a tool." She sat with this. Then she wrote, "But you thought about it?" "Yes," I said. "I thought about it." She nodded slowly. There was something in the nod, not forgiveness, which would have implied offense taken. And she had not taken offense, more like acknowledgement. More like, "I understand how you think, and I understand that you told me the truth, and that is worth more than the sanitized version would have been." She wrote, "Thank you," I said. "For what?" She wrote, "Honest." I sat with that for a long time after I left the room. On the 5th day, Thiessen gave me the last 2 names. He was not gracious about it. He had been gracious about very little in the preceding days. He was a man who had built something with precision and patience and had it taken from him in 11 seconds by a 19-year-old girl dropping a vial from a window. And the indignity of it was a wound that hurt more than the paralysis. He gave me the names, and then he was quiet for a long time, and then he said something I had not expected him to say. He said she was supposed to be irrelevant. I looked at him. "Myra's daughter," he said. "We used Myra because she had access, and because she owed us nothing. She was not a true believer. She was a pragmatist, and pragmatists are useful because they can be given a task that looks administrative and will Complete it without asking the question that matters. We didn't need the daughter. She was just the delivery mechanism. He paused. We made her irrelevant before she even arrived. I said, and yet. He looked at his hands. And yet. He said, after a moment. In a different register entirely. The register of someone not performing for an audience, just speaking into the room. I've spent 20 years on this. I genuinely believe the gift was misallocated. I genuinely believe the old systems had something the new ones lost. I'm not asking you to agree. I'm just telling you that this wasn't malice. This was conviction, I said. Yes, I thought about what conviction costs and what it costs the people adjacent to those who carry it. I thought about Myra, who had helped a man document my administrative patterns because he framed it as historical work, and she had wanted, once, to do something that felt like it mattered beyond the household. I thought about Lyra, who had carried a vial of something her dead mother asked her to carry, to a place her dead mother asked her to go, and had lost her voice doing it. I said, your conviction is your own business. What you did with it is mine. He nodded. He was not arguing. He was past arguing. He spent the rest of his detention in the holding rooms. The 11 others were located and detained over the following weeks, through the network of contacts that the names gave us access to. The Hollow Covenant was a structure, not a body. You could remove the people and the structure would persist if you didn't also understand how it was built. I'd understand the architect took my chimney. But that is a different story. The story I am telling now is about the 11th day. On the 11th day, Lyra came to find me. I was in the study, reading correspondence from the Southern Territories that had accumulated while I was managing the aftermath. She came to the doorway and knocked on the frame, the same precise knock she had used at the outer gate 12 days ago. The knock that had started all of this. I looked up. She came in and sat down across from me. She folded her hands on the table. She looked at me with the look that had become familiar over 11 days of silence. The look that said, I have something to tell you, and I am going to tell it to you completely and without softening. I waited. She opened her mouth. My mother told me, she said. Her voice was rough, not fully restored, but present. The words came out with the specific deliberateness of someone managing a new instrument, choosing each one carefully. I said, I know, the letter, not the letter, she said. Before, when she was sick, the night before the last coherent day, she told me what was in the vial, what it did, what the plan was. She looked at her hands for a moment, then back at me. She didn't just write the letter to give me the choice. She spoke it to me, out loud, looking at me, in the way she did when she was telling me something she needed to be sure I heard. A pause. She told me everything, including that she had helped them for months and didn't stop it when she should have. I was very still. And you came anyway, I said. I came anyway, she said. Even knowing what the vial was, even knowing. I looked at her. She looked at me. The study was very quiet. Outside, the spring day was doing what spring days do, moving forward without ceremony. Indifferent to everything that had happened in this room and everything that was happening now. Why? I sighed. She thought about it for a real moment, not the performance of thinking, actual consideration. Then she sighed because my mother spent 40 years working for you. And in those 40 years, she made one mistake, and she spent 2 years trying to fix it, and she died before she could. And I thought if I could bring you the truth, all of it, and let you decide what to do with it, Then maybe the 40 years would be what they were. And the 2 years would be part of it, and not the thing that undid all of it. She paused, and she said, more quietly, because I've spent 19 years watching how you operate, and I thought you deserved to know that someone brought you the truth on purpose. Not because they were forced to, on purpose. I thought about the 12 people who had arrived uninvited at my gate over 2 centuries. I thought about the caution that had governed every decision I'd made about who to let in and who to keep out. I thought about the efficiency of the law I had written on the wall in letters, a finger-width deep, and the cost of exceptions, and the reason I had stopped making them. I thought about a woman sitting on the floor of a corridor, asleep, and the feeling of sitting down beside her not out of sentiment, but because it was as good a place as any to think, and the other feeling, underneath that one, the one I hadn't named at the time, which was, this is what it's like to be in the presence of something that doesn't need anything from you. I said, I wasn't prepared for you. She looked at me. That's what the fear was, I said. I have been afraid of dying. I have been afraid of losing power. I have been afraid of the gods in my younger years, when I still thought their opinion of me mattered. I have been afraid of things I could understand and categorize and face with the appropriate response. I have never been afraid of. I stopped. I started again. I have never been afraid of being chosen, I said. Of having someone decide, with full information, to bring something to me rather than protect themselves from me. It's the one thing I had no protocol for. Lyra was quiet for a moment. Then she sighed. I didn't choose you because you're safe. I know, I said. I chose you because you're capable, she said. Because my mother spent 40 years watching you and she told me, whatever else she is, she handles things. She deals with the real situation. She doesn't pretend. A pause, and she was right about that. I thought about Myra. About 40 years of mutual respect built in the specific way that respect builds, when neither person is asking anything from the other except quality of work and honesty. I thought about the letter she had written in her last hours, the admission, the truth, the trust placed in her daughter to carry it. I thought about what it costs to be honest when honesty is the hardest possible thing. I said, she taught you well. Lyra said, she taught me to finish what I started. A slight smile, barely there, the first one in 11 days. Even when I probably shouldn't, I said, you can stay, if you want to. There's work here that suits people who read contracts in for languages and can tell the difference between a gift and a weapon. She looked at me for a long moment. Is that an invitation? She said. Yes, I said. A formal one, not out of obligation. Not because you did something useful, because I'm asking. She said, my mother always said you didn't ask. I don't, I said. Usually, she thought about it. She looked at her hands, the hands that had held the vial, that had dropped it from 2 floors up without hesitating, that were almost fully restored now, that were her mother's hands in their proportion and their steadiness. She said, all right. She stood up. At the door she paused. She said, Thiessen said something to me when they were leading him out. I don't know if you were told. I said, what? He said, tell her that Kaelin knows. She watched my face. He said you'd understand what it meant. I looked at her. I kept my expression exactly as it was. I was very good at this. I said, did he say anything else? No, she said, just that. He said it like he thought it would scare you. She waited to see if it had. I said, go rest. Your voice needs more time. She nodded and went. I sat alone in the study, and I looked at my hands, Kaelin, a name I had not heard in 800 years. A name that belonged to something I had been certain in the way you become certain about things when you have had 800 years to watch no evidence of them, was gone, truly gone. Not dormant, not hidden, not rebuilt under a different name, gone. Thesan had built 2 years of preparation to get close enough to disrupt me for 90 minutes. Kaelin had been building something for 800 years. I looked at my hands. They were steady. They had always been steady. I thought, I have survived everything else. I have survived gods and armies, and the specific patient malice of people who believe they have been wronged by my existence. I have survived loneliness and the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from living long enough to see everything you once believed was permanent dissolve into its components. I have survived all of it. And then a girl came to my door with her dead mother's cloak and a vial of something that was supposed to be perfume. And she chose me with full knowledge, and I sat on the floor beside her while she recovered. And I invited her to stay, and she said yes. I thought, the thing I was not prepared for turned out not to be the covenant. It was this. Being chosen is the one thing that doesn't leave you. Everything else, the wars, the gods, the betrayals, the centuries of accumulated caution, you learn to carry them, and eventually they become part of the landscape, inseparable from the self that was formed by surviving them. But being chosen, that stays differently. It sits in a different part of you, in the part that is still surprised that things can be offered rather than taken, in the part that remembers, with specific and undiminishing clarity, that someone looked at you with full information and said, yes, anyway, I choose this. I choose you. I was not prepared for it. I am still not entirely sure what to do with it. But for the first time in a very long time, I have someone in this house who read contracts in for languages and can tell a gift from a weapon, and who came through my gate uninvited because she decided I could handle the complicated things. She was right. The name Kaelin sits in my chest, like a stone that has not yet told me its weight. But that is a different memory, one that Medusa has not yet decided how to tell. She believed that the worst thing Thesan could have done was what he tried to do. She was wrong. What he had done was tell her a name. And names, in the right mouth, at the right moment, are not the beginning of a story. They are the proof that a story you thought was over never ended at all. If this story reached your heart, leave us a like and share it. What would you have done? And don't miss what comes next. Another memory Medusa never forgot.